Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Solidarity Saturday. My name is Katie Christensen. My pronouns are she, her. I serve as the North Dakota State Director for Planned Parenthood's work here in North Dakota, and I am honored to be your MC today. Thank you so much for joining us and for being here. So just as a friendly reminder, Solidarity Saturday is a virtual space for North Dakotans to build communities of empowered and informed advocates so we can raise our voices, support each other, and work together for justice and equity. Throughout this spring, we will be meeting every month, just as we usually do, and we'll be providing you with legislative updates while we are in session. So that's what we're aiming to do today, is connect you with what's going on in our state legislature. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to my colleagues on the planning team. I think most of them have their cameras on, so they could maybe even wave or give a little smile. Amy Jacobson with Prairie Action, Andrew Bushaw with AFL-CIO, Carrie Brecker with Moms Demand Action, and Madison Ziegler, who's my colleague at Planned Parenthood. All right, so a couple of things to keep in mind as we proceed with today's session. We encourage you to keep your camera on if you feel comfortable and able. All microphones will be muted. That really helps keep things smooth and easily understandable for everyone. We ask that you please be respectful and kind with any of your comments or questions, and use the chat to build community. If you have questions, we ask that you put them in the chat. If we have time, we will most definitely read those aloud and share them with our panelists. And you can also use that as an opportunity to connect offline as we put different email addresses, websites, calls to action, things like that in there. All right, so next up, I want to share just really briefly, we've got a great program for you today. As always, we're going to start with our typical icebreaker. We decided to mix things up a little bit and throw in a game. So that will be coming up next. And then we have a program that is going to focus on something that I think all of us hold near and dear to our heart, and that is the children and youth that we have here in North Dakota. And so today our panel and our featured speaker are really going to explore what the legislature is and isn't doing for our youth and how that impacts their well-being and their outcomes. And then we'll finish up with some action items. All right, so as usual, we're going to do that icebreaker where we're going to see where we are all located. So if you take a look, if you go up to the top of your screen, there should be the word annotate. It might look like a little crayon. And if you select that, you should be able to select, I think it's stamp. And then we like the heart, but you can pick any stamp that you want. And we want you to share where you are located. Where are you joining us from? So go ahead and mark where you're from on the map. If you don't know how to do that, you can just put it in the chat. And for today's question, I thought I would gather from everyone here, what are you looking forward to most today? It could be in this session or maybe later on today. What are some things that you're hoping to get done or you're looking forward to doing? So go ahead and post that in the chat. We'd love to hear that. And then next up, we'll actually play our little game. So it looks like we've got a nice group of people here. Mandan, Fargo, Bismarck, Warsaw, Fargo again. I'm looking forward to sleep. Yes, and that is coming from one of our representatives. And so Representative Dekane, I hope you're able to get some sleep and rest and relaxation. Grand Forks, Minot. So wonderful to see so many people joining us from around the state. Yep, so put what you're hoping to do in there. I'm going to go ahead and clear these stamps off, and then we're going to move over to our game. All right, so this game is going to be called Show What You Know. If you want, you could continue to use your stamp to stamp what you think is the right answer to the question, or you can just go ahead and post it in the chat. Okay, so here comes question number one. Question number one is going to be about school lunches, about our school meals. So the authors of House Bill 1491, a bill to provide breakfast and lunch for all students in North Dakota schools, requested $89.5 million to cover these costs. How much did this committee end up asking from appropriations? These are your choices. Did they go with the full 89.5 million, 24 million, 6 million, or $0? Let's see how we do. Oh, it looks like we have a lot of people keeping up with the state legislature. The correct answer is 6 million. So they actually slimmed that bill down quite a bit, and we're going to be hearing more about that from Andrew Bushaw later today. So I'm going to clear those, and let's go to question number 2. All right. Question number 2. House Bill 1532 received a due pass recommendation from the House Education Committee. If enacted, this bill would send public funds to private schools. How much money would this bill send to private, mostly religious-based schools? So you got the same choices here: 89.5 million, 24 million, 6 million, or 0. Okay. And the right answer is 24 million. And we'll be hearing more about that today from Ryan Nagle. I'm going to clear those out. Okay, next question. Oopsie. Let's talk childcare. So accessing affordable quality childcare is a priority issue for North Dakota families with young children. How many more childcare slots does North Dakota need to meet the demand for children ages 0 to 5 with working parents? These are your options: 1,000, 2,500, 5,000, or 10,000. Yeah, and the correct answer is 10,000. That is how short our child care is in this state. Pretty astounding. And we'll be hearing more about that from Amy Jacobson. All right, let's see, what are we talking about next? Oh, we're going to talk about an abortion bill. The Senate recently passed Senate Bill 2150. It's a near total abortion ban. Of our 47 state senators, how many of them voted against it? So of those 47 state senators, how many of them actually voted to protect abortion access in this state? 17, 12, 4, or 0? And the correct answer here is actually 4. So we have a Senate right now that is very, very hostile towards reproductive rights. I'm going to clear these, and I believe I have one more question. All right, question number 5. If House Bill 1205 were enacted, which of the following books would be banned? Let's talk about it. The family book, Lawn Boy, or the Bible? See how we're doing. Oh, we got a lot of A's here. This one's a little bit of, well, it does say which of the following, so you can pick more than one answer. And the truth of the matter is, it is all of them. Every single book up here would be banned based on how Senate Bill or House Bill 1205 is written. The bill actually includes visuals, but also written depictions of nuded or partially nuded bodies and a whole host of other things. So that's how we end up with books that don't even have pictures in them, ending up on this banned list. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my slide at this point, and we are going to move into our panel. So today we're going to move into this panel portion, and we're going to kick things off with a leading expert on LGBTQ well-being in the state of North Dakota, Faye Seidler. Faye is a suicide prevention advocate who serves as the North Dakota data expert in LGBTQ plus outcome data. She works across the state with healthcare, social work, and education organizations to improve LGBTQ community health resources and opportunities. Faye, we thank you so much for all of the work that you are doing in this state and for showing up and educating us. So I'll hand it over to Faye now.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. Someone just wants to put my email in the chat, fayeseidler@gmail.com, if you want to get in touch with me about any of the information I want to talk about. please do so. We have 17 explicit bills targeting trans individuals this legislative session. We have 22 bills that are going to impact queer people in general, and those can be like our parental rights bills that basically allow parents to control the mental health of their child, is kind of the language they have in some of those bills. Some of them have been shot down so far, some of them have gone through. The scariest one that's gone through so far is Senate Bill 2231, and that actually got voted on the House floor on Friday, just yesterday, 34-12. 34-12 in the Senate for a bill like that means it's veto proof if nothing changes. If that does end up, well, it will pass the House, and then if the governor ends up vetoing it and going back, as it stands now, it is heading to either law or legal challenge. That bill explicitly prohibits schools from acknowledging gender identity in any capacity, from acknowledging trans individuals, from using the pronouns that you would prefer within the school systems, with the exception if your parent and school administrators say your child can use their preferred pronouns and every single teacher agrees to do so. That is the only way to get your pronouns to be correctly used within school systems as a trans child, if that's something that passes, not just trans, but gender fluid and everything like that. So it's basically systematically erasing trans individuals in any capacity of support within the school systems. The reason that's important, the reason all these bills are important, is because they all can amount to an increase in suicidality in this population. A lot of the higher suicidality within queer populations is due to minoritized stress. It's due to not being able to find support or community or hope in the places that you exist in. When these bills stop kids from getting support in school and empower parents to decide what their mental health is, these kids have no opportunity nor option. And this is not just impacting our trans youth or our queer youth. It is kids who start questioning this, who are not trans. They'll figure that out in a year or two, but they tell their parents that and they get just smacked down. You can't just tell your kid not to do something and then that's what's going to happen. They are going to rebel against you. So even if they're not trans and they start to try to identify this way or explore this, they can have such a visceral reaction to the rejection that they still run away, that they still experience all this harm. Because what happens when kids have no support at home or at school is they stop going to school and they stop being at home and they start running away. They also are open to a lot of different risks that involve trafficking or harm and violence that can happen. So when we look at these bills, we can frame them within human rights, but really I frame them in terms of a healthcare perspective of suicidality. When you remove the support of a community, what else could happen when they have no one they can actually go to? I've been doing hundreds of hours on looking at all the bills that have happened, what's going on with that, trying to organize information and data response to it. If you need any information about that, if you want to follow them, if you want to follow action items on them, you can email me. I don't do all the work. I connected to a lot of folks that are doing work like Prairie Action Network or North Dakota Human Rights Coalition and a lot of other different organizations doing that kind of work. But basically, we have probably every bill that is anti-queer right now is very likely to pass both House and Senate, based on what we saw with SB 2231. That was the first do pass bill that we saw enter the Senate. So we're all kind of waiting for how would this fall? How would all these bills fall? And it looks like they're probably going to fall in a pretty awful way. Otherwise, I have a lot of different action items where you can email me. I can get information about things you can do. One thing I just want to touch base on before I move over to other panelists is that we can focus on the legislation, and that's great to fight that. That should be at most half the fight. The other fight should be making sure that people in your life know that you love them, that you support them, that you talk to your kids about this and let them know no matter how they identify, you will love and feed them, that your home will be safe. Because so often kids are terrified that if they come out and talk about their identity, they don't get to be people anymore, that they get rejected, that they no longer have love. So as we look at this legislative session, as we look at these bills, also keep in mind your community. Make sure that you're fighting within this culture, because ultimately that's what change will be. It won't be this legislation. It will be us having conversations over time, putting more support and building more resiliency within queer populations across the state. So try to do both with legislation and building community. So that's what I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Faye, so much for the work that we knew that you do. We know that really the root of what Faye is doing is suicide prevention work. And it's very important that we all keep an eye on this. I mean, when we talk about what's best for our children and youth in this state, that should be at the core of what we're that's like a bare minimum of what we should be attending to as suicide prevention. So thank you very much for doing this really, really hard work and important work every single day. Next up on our list, we have Andrew Bushaw. He's with AFL-CIO, and he's going to give us some updates on what's going on with keeping those kids fed in school.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So I wanted to bring an update on 2 meal shaming bills that are happening here in North Dakota, or school lunch bills. The first one that we're going to talk about is 1491. 1491 started as universal school lunch, and it was brought by Representative Hager and co-sponsored by a number of other friends in the legislature. And when we look at that, it came into committee, and in committee it was amended to go from $89 million, as our question previously asked, to $6 million. The change was basically made to increase, so it does 2 things. One, the amended version would essentially eliminate reduced price meals, school lunches, to where the state would cover the 40 cents that's normally, would cost the parents. So that is a good thing right there. And then it does increase the threshold from 120% to 200%, or 185% for free and reduced to 200%. So we are seeing, there in this amended bill, there is an increase for families that are right on the edge, sort of that cliff where they fall off and then no longer are able to receive any free or reduced lunches. So that will be in Appropriations Committee Wednesday at 9:15 this Wednesday, and we are trying to get as many people to contact the Appropriations Committee as possible, the House Appropriations Committee, and urge them a do pass. It did get a do pass out of the House. It was an 8-6 vote. House Education Committee, so that was good in the amended form. We also want to encourage people to keep pushing for more. We still think it should be universal school lunch, right? Even though this is a compromise bill, $6 million is better than $0 million for school lunches, but we would like to see either that percentage threshold increase, but ultimately we think that just all kids should just get a hot lunch when they're at school, regardless of income, no means testing. So that's 1491. 1494 also came out of the House Education Committee with a do pass. It was also amended. 1494 is a lunch shaming bill. It would end things like denying kids food or providing alternate meals. If they have lunch debt, stopping them from participating in things like prom or graduation. There's a very powerful letter to the editor by Heather Goddess, Miss Bedanzaville, in the Fargo Forum. I'll post it in the chat, talking about her experience with lunch shaming. And it would eliminate things like that. We're guessing that this will also be amended further as it goes through the process, but right now it did get a do pass, 11-3 vote in the House Education Committee. I'm guessing that bill will also change a little bit as we move on, but really just keep pushing, letting your legislators know that you support, universal school lunch, and funding as much funding for universal school lunch as we can get. So I think that's it. Thank you, Amy.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. We appreciate that update. Next, we're going to move on to Amy Jacobson with Prairie Action, and she has been working tirelessly to improve access to childcare in this state. So Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Katie. So Prairie Action is an organizational member of a grassroots coalition called the North Dakota Childcare Action Alliance. It consists of organizations, childcare providers, both of large centers and in-home providers, and parents and community members who are exhausted with the state not dealing with the childcare crisis. We know this has been brewing for decades, but the COVID pandemic really broke the already fractured system. And so we have been working over the course of, even before the special session, to talk to our elected leaders about what they can do to listen to the child care experts and really address the system using their feedback. Our listening sessions that we held over the course of the last year with providers and parents and workers, what we found was we needed to address the childcare workforce. Right now in North Dakota, the average childcare provider earns just over $11 an hour, most likely with no benefits. We are not showing, and we know in our current climate, it's incredibly difficult to find workers. Now trying to find workers basically who are working for poverty level wages, because they're supposed to just work because they value children. We need to show them their value, that we value them and we value their work by making sure that they can get paid. What came from that was a Senate Bill 2301, and it is a child care stabilization program. It would provide state dollars to help supplement the wages and benefits of our child care workers. This bill, I will note, has a $36 million fiscal note to it, and that is not enough money. We had over a dozen child care providers provide in testimony saying we support this bill, but we need to triple that amount of money. Our guidance from our coalition was $150 million investment annually, and we want to see you get closer to that amount. So right now, where this bill stands is it's in the Workforce Development Committee in the Senate. It did get a due pass recommendation out of committee. However, on the floor, they did not speak high, they weren't like, we need to pass this bill. It was more like, I think we need to continue this conversation, so we're going to punt it down the road, which we are happy with. We did get that due pass recommendation. It will move to the Senate Appropriations Committee. So our job right now is to continue to talk about the fact that we need to shore up the childcare workforce. I will note that there are a few bills that deal with childcare. This is the only one that deals directly with the workforce and workforce development. We know that our childcare centers are struggling to place people because they're competing also with all these other jobs and not able to offer very, very much dollars. And we do need to be creative in this time of crisis when our state does have the money to invest in our children. What is our state doing and not doing for the children of North Dakota? They are not investing in our childcare system. Without having this money in our system, our parents are not going to be able to go to work. Our businesses are not going to be able to keep their doors open much longer. And our providers are already shutting their doors. So you should know this bill is modeled after what happened during the pandemic when we did get federal dollars to assist. It is modeled after a program that has helped our community, our childcare providers stay in business. And now we need to, as a state, build off of that and continue that work. Again, I think we dropped our action alert in the chat. That goes to your senators, and if you want to do more, please reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat because it will take all of us to put our voices together to keep the pressure on the legislature to do what's right for North Dakota's children. That is all I have. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Amy. Really appreciate that. I will say personally, I've always been utterly baffled by the fact that some of the people who make the lowest wages are actually caring for our children, like some of the most precious people that live in our state and our future leaders. Okay, so we have one more panelist before we move on to our featured speaker. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, go ahead and put it in the chat, and then we'll take those questions before we move on to our featured speaker, Ryan Nagle. Next up, we have Janet Anderson, and she is a library director here in North Dakota. Janet has worked in various roles within libraries in different states, Indiana, Virginia, and now North Dakota. She's been an academic librarian, a children's librarian, branch manager, adult services, so we definitely have an expert here. Janet has been married for 23 years to a really cool man, and she is the proud mom of 2 teens, all 3 of whom specialize in getting into good trouble. So please, join me in welcoming Janet, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. As I listen to so many of you, I can't help but think how libraries help impact all of these issues. We help work with childcare providers. We help provide meals when possible. But our biggest struggle right now is helping the youth of our state. Right now, we're facing 3 anti-library bills. They are SB 223, which would give me a Class B misdemeanor for shelving books that portray nudity or partial nudity. That one is especially concerning because it's not just libraries, it's art museums and bookstores and Walmart. Any place that would carry a book like 50 Shades of Grey would, anyone who works there could be fined with a Class B misdemeanor. SB 2360 actually has a hearing on Tuesday, and it's interesting. It is veiled under the access to basically pornography or obscenity through technology in schools and libraries, but it also changes the definition of obscenity from the Miller test, which is a National Supreme Court approved definition, to state that anything that goes against North Dakotan standards could be considered obscene. The other one, though, that's been especially important and impactful to our LGBTQ community is HB 1205. That is specifically for libraries, and it essentially provides a list of items that a library could not have visual depictions of. I really appreciated the trivia question. Thank you, because I know all three of those or all four of those books would not be allowed under these bills. But most of this comes from one book, which is called Let's Talk About It, A Teen's Guide to Sex. And it's a graphic novel that depicts various sexual activities, and it's gotten quite a few people in an uproar across the state. So because this book is in some libraries, our legislators have decided that they need to control more of what we have. The interesting thing to me, and listening to Faye especially, is that all of our communication with these legislators, and this goes back to Amy too, is that they're trying to protect our youth. They're trying to take care of our youth, yet they don't want to give the money to feed them or provide child care. And then on the other hand, they're saying that access to graphic materials such as this is going to increase their suicide. And that's just ridiculous. And we know that people need to see themselves represented in their state. And that's what we aim to do, is to have a collection that represents all sides. The interesting part, as you all saw, the Bible would be one of the books not allowed. And there's so much that's unclear and unanswered in these, and nobody has been able to answer these for us. At this time, the two bills that have gone to committee hearings, we don't even know the results of those. We understand that most likely 1205, which identifies a list of items not able to be carried, is likely got a do pass. But the other thing that includes is that we can't carry books that discuss gender identity. So that's going to include cisgender, heterosexual relationships. It's very, very vague, very I mean, it's just a slippery slope into censorship. And every legislator who's spoken to us about this says they do not support censorship. They do not support book banning. They are here to support and protect our youth. But we all know that this is doing the exact opposite of that. So we are working hard to try to protect our libraries across the state and also educate everyone, including our legislators, about what we do.
Thank you, Janet. I really appreciate that input. We do have a couple minutes here. If there are any questions for our panelists so far, please go ahead and post them. Janet, I'm actually going to pick on you if you don't mind. I do have a question. It seems like you have a lot of history with working in libraries, and I'm wondering if you have ever felt attacks like this before. Like, is this something that's common, like historically with libraries, or does it feel heavier now than maybe it has in the past?
It is definitely heavier now. We've seen it across the country over the last 1 to 2 years. There are some very well-paid conservative groups, including Moms for Liberty or of Liberty, who basically have created a website that documents every time a book or any item talks about homosexuality or has a swear word. And then they supply this list to a variety of people who then across the country come into a library and start challenging these books. So it's always something that we're prepared to do. And across my time, I've had book challenges, but never in such an organized, obviously anti-library way.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely a big difference between book challenges and book bans. I mean, those are they impact libraries very, very differently. We did have somebody ask, could you repeat the bill numbers? Do you know those? I know one is 1205, House Bill 1205. What was that second one?
Yes, absolutely. 1205 is the one that's especially impactful to LGBTQ. 2360, which has a hearing on Tuesday, is the one that redefines obscenity. And it's under the guise of protecting students and youth from online obscenity, which, by the way, schools and libraries, we already have filters in place for that. We take care of that. And then the other is 2123. That is the one that would charge someone with a Class B misdemeanor for having anything that portrays nudity or partial nudity, and that includes businesses and art museums.
Okay, thank you. And then we do have another question. Do you know if bills like this have passed in other states, or would we be the first?
Yes, they are passing in many other states. I know Virginia, Oklahoma, Florida have all had some pass. South Dakota looks like it's on the way to getting some. Wyoming did just vote down. They were able to kill a couple in committee, which is good news since they're a little more similar to us, but it is definitely getting a lot more momentum. And as the legislation changes across the country, a lot of these are sneaking through, even if they're slightly improved. They're still, again, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Another question for you. Could you expand a little bit or share again where these bills apply to what types of places? Like, is it our public schools, our public libraries, like you said, Walmart? I mean, is there any place that would be safe from this, or is it kind of all encompassing?
That's such a really good question, because 2360 and 1205 specify libraries. 2360 also specifies schools, but 2123, I apologize, I have to keep looking at the numbers. 2123 says anywhere where a minor is present, including roadways and walkways. So this would include billboards, and it says nuded figures, descriptions or depictions of nuded or partially nuded figures. So that one is all open to anywhere. And again, you think about books like 50 Shades of Grey or the Bible, and anywhere that would carry those, theoretically, a person who works there could be charged with a Class B misdemeanor.
It makes me wonder if we're going to criminalize stores when they have their mannequins out, like when they don't get the clothes on them and you walk by them. So that's criminalize everything, I guess.
Right.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat at the moment. Oh, Amy is shaking her head at me.
I think Andrew wanted to clarify a question that came out on the lunch.
Yes, yeah. I did see a comment about the school lunch, and yes, there are some amendments that are likely to come forward probably when it moves over to the Senate, if we can get it there. So the important thing is to make sure that we can get it to the Senate, for one. So encouraging your House members to vote on the floor early this week for that. But yes, there are some forces that would like to remove private debt collections from HB 1494. So basically allowing schools to send school lunch debt to private debt collectors, as some schools currently do. So there's a move to amend that. And then it was amended on the House floor to where there is only a 1 week that it allows for the school to not provide alternate meals or deny food. So instead of it being you just can't deny food, deny a meal or alternate meals, which as I understand, that's what like Fargo Schools does already. So they're already like in compliance with that. A legislator put forward an amendment and it was approved that said that they have a week, right? So the original bill said that that was indefinitely. So you basically have a week of grace period to get your money in your kid's account before they could start denying meals. I'm guessing that we're going to work pretty hard to get that amended out if possible, because that seems impossible to implement for both school service nutritionists or food service and school nutritionists to actually implement that. And then I don't know how you would do that without breaking number 2 and 3 of that policy, which is that you can't take food off kids' plates and you can't identify that they don't have money in their account. So I'm not sure how the amendment will actually work functionally, but I think that so we will see some amendments going forward, but really the main thing is we got to keep up momentum that we want to fix school meals in North Dakota for all schools. And so to do that, we need to pass 1491 fully funded, and we need to pass 1494 in the best position that we possibly can. So thanks.
Wonderful. So, and we'll staying on this topic of funding our schools and keeping our schools alive and well, and we're going to move to Ryan Nagle. He serves as the Assistant Executive Director for North Dakota United, the state's union for K-12 educators, higher education, staff and faculty, public employees. Ryan previously served as the state director for Heidi Heitkamp. And prior to that, he worked for SEIU for nearly a decade as the Director of Communications and Strategic Development for SEIU Healthcare, Minnesota. While he was in that position, he worked on numerous electoral campaigns, and he led that union's work in North Dakota to pass the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. So Ryan and his wife, Kirsten, have 3 children, Signe, Cormac, and Eamon. I would imagine they all also participate in Good Trouble, but I'll let him clarify that for us. So welcome, Ryan. And just as a friendly reminder, please continue putting your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them as we move along when Ryan is done. Go ahead,
I can't speak to whether or not it's good trouble that the kids get into, but most of the time it's good trouble, particularly our daughter Signe, who helped organize a climate strike a couple years ago. So just want to lift up the work that she did there, which was awesome. Thank you so much for everybody joining us this morning. Also, thank you to all the educators that are on the call today. I see a number of them, whether that's teachers in K-12, higher ed, see school board members on as well. Thank you for all that you do to make our public schools strong and to keep them strong. So I'm going to shift over to a slide presentation a bit, and please, I apologize in advance. I'm going to talk a little bit, not just about the legislature, but a little bit about how we got to what we're fighting in the legislature, because I think it's important. So I'm going to share my screen here, and bear with me. I think I've got it down. Can folks see that okay? Great. So I want to talk about how democracy really at its core depends on a strong public education system. All right, so we're going to make sure, there we go. Public education really has been at the center of the American experiment. It's something that we, it sets us apart from a lot of other nations around the world, in that we provide education for every person in this country, regardless of creed, color, sexual orientation, ability, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody who wants to come through the doors of a school, we educate those folks, and it's a great place for us to start to actually engage with others in our community. And I use this picture here, again, showing that it's constantly been a struggle to stand up for that sort of system, right? Whether it's making sure that we allowed our African-American community members to join us in the same public schools. This fight's been going on for a long time. It's going to continue going on, to be honest. So I want to lift up, public education really is a beautiful institution that really helps us live out the best of what we say we are as Americans, right? I think sometimes we lose sight of those things that we have in our basic creed as a country. I think within public schools, it's a place where we push for equity, right? Making sure that folks not just have the opportunity, but also some of the supports to make sure that if they're coming from challenges at home or challenges in the ability to maybe it's somebody who has a learning disability, getting folks the skills and supports that they need so that they can have the same opportunities, but also the same supports in achieving what they want to achieve as a member of the community. It's a place where we support diversity, right? It's if we go to, I'll get to this a little bit later, but some of the school systems that are being proposed that we ought to support, I would suggest really lead to a group of students that looks like me as a Caucasian. It's going to be folks who have resources, folks who probably are cisgender, right? Folks who are probably of particular faiths, right? And not a whole lot of diversity. And we start to just get into our little bubbles. And frankly, I think that's one of the most beautiful things about public education is it's a place where you engage with every side of the community. And I think it's why our kids, frankly, are far more accepting of diversity than many of us as adults in the community are. And it's a place where we can build that diversity and that love of every single person that walks through the door. It's also a place where there's a hope for future and progress, right? We continue to think about, okay, what are the ways that we need to support our community in better and stronger ways? What are some of the thought patterns that have become a little bit calcified that we need to think about? Okay, maybe it started back years ago, maybe it's not okay for us to spank our kids, right? Or a corporal punishment in the schools, right? We start to think those things through as we see new progress and new ideas coming out to make sure that everybody has the ability to live to their fullest. So if public education is this beautiful thing that really helps us support democracy and build to our better angels as Americans, then why the heck is that sort of thing under attack? So I think exactly what I named before are exactly what makes it beautiful is also what presents challenges. I think the idea of really pushing to make sure that we've got equity in inequitable communities, right? Trying to actually get to a place where we're dealing with, communities that have been fighting for centuries to have opportunities and wealth in their community, and trying to build equity in those places is a challenge. Diversity in a polarized society, right? This is, I think, particularly in North Dakota, we're starting to deal with this, right? North Dakota, historically, after we, as white people, took the land from the original inhabitants here that are still with us, we actually were a very white society for a long time. And now, as North Dakota becomes more and more diverse, I think we're seeing more and more challenges for folks to actually learn to live with our community members. So we see that become an issue over and over in our country, and I think we're seeing it play out in our schools as well. And that last point, hope for a future and progress, means recognizing and filling gaps. There is horrible inequity in our communities. We know this. And trying to fill those gaps makes it a real challenge for public education, right? I think any of the educators that are here would tell you they went into teaching because they wanted to be able to work with kids and teach kids, but 9 times out of 10, they're figuring out, how do I make sure that kid has food? How do I make sure that kid has somebody that tells them that they love them? How do I make sure that kid has a safe ride home? How do I make sure that, et cetera, et cetera? And our public schools really have become, in some ways, the emergency room in a lot of ways for so many social challenges that we have as a country. So like I just mentioned there, we're asking our schools to address our community's challenges and shortfalls while at the same time standing up for public education. So enter in the folks that want to sow division among us. This is a mailing that was sent out to many of our members. Many of you probably saw this, suggesting that our public schools are indoctrinating kids and, as it says here, miseducating our youth, because we talk about issues of race or class or gender, etc. Fill in the blank. It's being used by folks to really divide us in ways that I think are frankly, I'm going to get into it. I think it's frankly a crass division that they're trying to do here. So I'll let folks just read through this cartoon a little bit. Sort of speaks to the fight that we're starting to see in the legislature. Right? So how do we heal this country's divisions? Voucherville, we split off into all our little bubbles where, as you can see there, a charter school, the prep school where maybe the kids with more wealth go, the religious schools, which again, folks have the choice to go to all of these places, but it becomes an issue when we start to use our public resources to pay for all of these different education systems. So really, disinvestment in our public spaces has some impacts that we need to be talking about. Number one, I think most importantly, it's dividing us, right? And that sort of goes to my beginning point about how public schools are really important to democracy. Democracy is really challenging when we get into this division and we create factions and we sort of wall ourselves off into communities where we only talk to people who agree with us. We only sit next to people who look like us. And the more that we're seeing this fight in public education, the more at least me personally, I'm feeling that it's really playing out the division that we're seeing in our country. It's continuing the story that we've seen so many places that we're sorting by race, by class. And I would challenge people to think about that in your own lives. How many times are you actually in space with folks that don't look like you and don't come from the same socioeconomic class as you do? Those times are becoming fewer and fewer, I think, in our country, and shamefully so. And really, when we continue to do this, and we're seeing this in states around the country, quality education pretty soon only becomes available to the few. Pretty soon, the public system has been so robbed of resources and so split that the only kids that are going to public education are those that haven't figured a way out through this voucher system that sort of sucks the money out of a public system and gives it to folks that frankly have resources abounding and frankly don't need public investment. So I'm gonna wrap through a bunch of fast facts about how vouchers harm students, schools, and communities. I'm gonna send you a link to a PowerPoint that has a PDF that has a ton of facts and figures related to this. So notice that I'm not citing exactly all of the arguments here, but what I'm going to share with you certainly does. There's been studies upon studies upon studies within this area. Number one, this is easy, right? Like vouchers, the idea of giving money to parents to take their kids to a private school or private education, clearly that diverts scarce resources. I think you'll hear a lot of people in the argument around House Bill 1532 to say, well, this isn't taking money away from public schools. Is that there's a tiniest of kernel of truth in that, right? It's not taking it directly out of the per pupil funding mechanisms for our public schools. But if we say our budget is X amount of dollars and some of that 24 million in this case is now going to go to private education, tell me that's not diverting resources from public education. Vouchers don't save money. If a couple of kids from Clara Barton, where my kids go to school, a couple kids go to get a voucher and go to a private school, I'm pretty sure that the operating costs for Clara Barton are still going to be identically the same in terms of buildings, staff, maintaining those buildings, right? It's the operating costs still remain the same, and those folks are just taking their money out of it, and it doesn't help us save money in terms of like having fewer buildings or fewer educators. Study after study, I think there's a lot of arguments of how our public schools are somehow failing by the number of kids who can read, or et cetera, whatever test score you want to insert on a given day. They then use the idea that vouchers are good for getting kids out and improving academic achievement. It's not the case. I mean, again, study after study is very clear on this point. And it's not a real choice for parents, right? It's so many parents, if they got this voucher, if the idea is to help kids that are poor access a better private education, 9 times out of 10, these vouchers are not nearly enough to pay for private education. What ends up happening really here is these vouchers go predominantly to folks who are they've already made the choice, they're already paying for private education, and it now gets them public resources for a private choice that they made. There's lack of accountability and oversight. If folks watched the committee hearing on 1532, there was a lot of dancing around about private schools living up to the same standards that public schools do. I think it was Superintendent Bitz or Hornbacher from Mandan and Bismarck. I can't remember who made the exact point, but they said, when we play a basketball game as, I think it was Mandan, as Mandan High, if they play a basketball game against St. Mary's, we play by the same rules in that basketball game. Problem is when we go to the schools, that public school is required to admit, and rightfully so, I'm not saying that this is a thing we should change, rightfully so, admits every single kid who wants to come through that door, whether that child has no challenges at all or has every challenge under the sun. That private education isn't required under things like the IDEA, which is for special ed. It's not required to stand up for Title IX or any of those other things that public schools are required to stand up for. It just makes a really challenging. The point I was going to make there is they talk about it being good to have competition for public schools by allowing these private school vouchers. The problem is it's not a fair competition because one body is being asked to do far more than the other. And you could see it in the response from Shane Gettle when he was talking about this on the bill. So he, one of the Republican reps actually was sort of suggesting, well, why don't we just hold them to the same standards? And he did the, well, and hemmed and hawed and danced and said, well, we are approved by DPI, Department of Public Instruction. That is yes, they are approved by the DPI, but they are not required to follow so many of those federal laws that public schools are. And I know our school board members that are on could certainly list all of the different regulations that our public schools are held to. And I mentioned that last point, the vast majority goes to kids already in private education. So I've mentioned it already a bit. House Bill 1532 was introduced by Representative Corey. If you look at her reasons for introducing this bill, it was a lot of what I already, sort of a laundry list of those myths that I offered before. You know, we need to have competition, the things they're teaching our kids in the schools these days, parents need a choice, et cetera, et cetera. I'll remind folks again, parents do have a choice today. North Dakota United is wholly supportive of parents making that choice. If a different education system is better for their kids, we draw the line when it becomes public resources paying for that private choice. So that bill, House Bill 1532, received an 8-6 due pass from the House Education Committee. I would say that was a closer vote than we expected. I think there was a number of representatives that were really concerned, I think, about the accountability conversation and so if we're sending $24 million to private institutions, we probably ought to know where that money is being spent, how it's being spent, in the same way that our public schools are held to open records, are held to a standard that we ought to do when we're spending public dollars. So that bill 1532 got that 8-6 due pass from the House Education Committee. It's headed to the House Appropriations Committee this week. I think on Wednesday is that hearing. Knock on wood, but we feel like there's a good chance that we could get a do not pass recommendation from the Appropriations Committee. I say all that, it's probably going to pass the House if you look at the makeup of the North Dakota House of Representatives. But our hope here is really to raise these questions and get people to think about, do we really want to send $24 million to totally unaccountable institutions that aren't required to play by the same rules that public education is? And do we want to do that when public education, particularly North Dakota public education, is some of the best in the world? And reminding folks that we have world-class educators, and we ought to be investing in that system, and we ought to be investing in the things that that system needs, as opposed to pulling money out of there. So what can we do? folks can speak up on social media for safe, affirming, and high quality community schools, right? Just I would love everyone on here. If you've got a kid in public school, you got a grandkid, you got a niece, a nephew, a neighbor, just go on social media and say how much you care for that school, for that community, for the level of support that they provide. Our community schools are fantastic. Show up to school board meetings, engage with your friends and family. And then here's the PDF that I referenced. This is a fantastic document. I think it's about 50 pages. There's about 2 or 3 that are fast facts, but if you really want to dive deep, there's a ton there. And then the last thing I'd ask everybody to do, click on that link there to write to the House Appropriations Committee and let them know that you oppose sending public dollars to private entities that are unaccountable. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. We really appreciate all that. And Carrie is posting those links in the chat. So please check them out if you want to look at that toolkit and then take the action. That would be incredibly helpful today. We want to finish up here within the next couple minutes. I think Carrie is also going to post a feedback form in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Ryan, we do have one quick question that I'm wondering if we can address nice and quickly. Somebody was wondering if we know how many legislators have kids or grandkids in the private schools. Do you feel like they should be sharing that in terms of transparency? Like, is there some bias in it, you know, benefiting their personal family versus looking at the kind of the state overall well-being?
Good question. I know there's a number of legislators that have children in private education. Again, I want to be clear. That's a totally valid choice that parents can make. We want to be clear about that. It's not that we want to eliminate that choice. I don't know what that number is. I'd be willing to bet that there's several that do send their kids to private education, but are opposed to vouchers. And I'd like to follow up, because there certainly are. I know Representative Schreiber-Beck has been just a fierce champion on this issue for a lot of sessions in a row of pushing back on this idea of sending public money to private entities. And I know that she at least has helped raise some money for the private school in her district. So.
Okay, thanks. Well, I was trying to put up my last slide, but apparently I just put up the middle of the thing here. So we are at the end of our session here. Thank you very much. Please make sure that you fill out that feedback form for us. We will see you on March 11th. That's 1 month from today for our next Solidarity Saturday, and we'll be providing you with more legislative updates. You can follow Solidarity Saturday on Facebook, and you can subscribe for the Prairie Briefing to keep up to date on the media and what's going on in the state. We thank all of you for being here with us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month.